For over the past year, my team, the Houston Texans, have been making headlines for their recent success and offseason additions. And it's no surprise, because when you look at where this team was just a year and a half ago, many people thought this team had no hope for the future. I mean, people were even saying they can't even lose right after a Week 18 comeback win against the Colts, which lost us the first overall pick rights. But little did we all know, that comeback win would spark one of the greatest and fastest rebuilds we have ever seen in the NFL. You see, if the Texans don't win that game, they don't end up drafting both Stroud and Will Anderson Jr. Well, it at least sounds like they wouldn't have due to reports saying they really liked Bryce Young at the time. But at the end of the day, that's all just assumptions. CJ and Will weren't the only additions that sparked the rebuild last offseason, as we added DeMeco Ryans as our new head coach. Now, if you don't live in the city of Houston or aren't a Texans fan, then you likely don't understand how much bringing DeMeco Ryans on as our new head coach really meant to us fans and the city. If you weren't already aware, DeMeco Ryans is a former Texans player who played a vital role in the growth of this franchise from 2006 to 2011. But it wasn't only because of what he did on the field. It was also how he brought everyone together and became one of the leaders of our team back then. So, fast forward to last offseason, you could understand why the Texans and us fans wanted DeMeco Ryans to return back to this franchise to help lead the rebuild. Not to mention that he was the top head coaching candidate as well, and many people wanted us to finally bring in our head coach of the future after having 2 seasons of filler coaches. But anyways, I say all this just to help y'all understand what bringing in DeMeco really did for our team. Honestly, I hadn't seen the city so excited and brought together when he was announced as our head coach in a long time. So before CJ and Will, the one that came before them that really sparked this rebuild and gave this fan base hope, as cliche as it sounds, was DeMeco Ryans. That's not to say that CJ Stroud and Will Anderson Jr. didn't help or give us fans hope for the future as well. They definitely proved their worth last season, with both of them taking home the Offensive and Defensive Rookie of the Year awards. And honestly, without them, let's be honest, I'm not making this video. Now, everything I've said so far is what happened last season, and I think most of us can agree. It was a great season. We went from worst to best in our division, a team that was considered a laughingstock of a franchise, to a team that many fans around the league ended up rooting for. So yeah, last season got me excited, but one of the biggest reasons why it got me excited was for the future. Which brings me to what this video is really about, and that is, can we take the next step and compete for a Super Bowl this season? Now, to some of y'all, that might sound crazy, but I myself actually think the Texans can do it. You can call me biased all you want, but I have reasons to believe they actually can. So let's get into the reasons why I believe that. First off, with our team being very young, it's safe to say we should see growth in many players' games from this past season. Not only was last season the first year in the NFL for guys like CJ Stroud, Tank Dell, Will Anderson Jr., or, let's hope I say his name right, Henry To'oTo'o, but it was also many players' breakout season. Guys like Nico Collins, Christian Harris, and even the guy who many fans thought the Texans missed on in the 2022 NFL Draft, Derek Stingley Jr. They all saw a step up in production from their previous season. Now, I know the sophomore slump is a thing, and we've seen players become one-year wonders before, but the way this franchise and these players are heading, I just don't see that being the case for them. I mean, just look at CJ Stroud. He's already being talked about as one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and it's for good reason. Because when you watch the tape and hear what others have to say about him, it's not as simple as once he gets figured out, he'll be easy to stop, as is the case with many players who see a sophomore slump. Rather with CJ, it's how well he processes the game and how mature he is for where he is at in his career. I know it's going to sound like I'm glazing with what I'm about to say, but it's true. CJ Stroud is unlike any rookie quarterback we have ever seen. And if you don't want to take my word for it, or want to hear a more extensive breakdown on CJ's game, then check out the videos JT O'Sullivan has done on him throughout the season via the YouTube channel, The QB School. Not to mention that CJ did all this with no run game, a receiving core that felt like a revolving door of injuries, and a heavily injured offensive line. I mean, even just a few weeks into the season, we were down to our 3rd string left guard and 4th string center, and later on, it didn't get much better. But going into this season, the weapons around CJ have vastly improved, and knock on wood, possibly a healthy offensive line. However, as a Texans fan, I can't remember the last time we had a healthy offensive line. But anyways, the main offseason addition that has caused the most headlines is the Texans trading for former Bills wide receiver Stefon Diggs, which if you were to ask me about this back in March, I would have probably told you I didn't want him. But now that it's happened and I've had time to think about it, I actually really like this addition. You see, Diggs is getting up there in age, and it started to show last season as he took a step back from his previous seasons, and he's also shown to be quite the diva sometimes. So as things stand right now, Diggs has a lot to prove to not only the Texans, but to other teams around the league that he still has more left in the tank, and he could be a team player. After all, the Texans restructured his deal to make him a free agent next offseason, which many fans disagreed with that decision, and it's understandable as to why they feel that way. Some fans just see it as us trading away a second-round pick for 1 year of Stefon Diggs, but this decision is what truly made me love this deal. The reason I love this decision is because of all the aforementioned stuff. You see, if Diggs doesn't work out, we won't be stuck having to pay him all this extra money. And like I said earlier, Diggs will now see this season as a prove-it year in hopes of receiving a longer contract next offseason. And we all know how players ball out when it's time for a contract. Plus, we have 2 other top receivers who will help take some of the stress and workload off his shoulders. Also, you gotta remember, we made this trade to compete for a Super Bowl now, not for an investment into our future. Not to mention, in my eyes, he was the best option out of everyone we were in talks for trading for at the wide receiver position, those being T. Higgins, who I believe would ask for top receiver money, even though in my opinion, Nico Collins is better, but we're not going to get into that. Also, AJ Brown, who would have asked for an absurd amount of money. Plus, he's had his fair share of diva issues, and we have a good culture that doesn't need that. Lastly, Keenan Allen is injury prone, and he's 32 years old. So as long as Diggs balls out like we know he can, and merges well with the culture we have set, then yeah, I feel like we made the right decision. Also, semi-hot take, I could easily see Diggs being our wide receiver 3 behind Nico Collins and Tank Dell, simply due to Tank seemingly being CJ's favorite target and Nico arguably being our number 1. But honestly, I think the ball will get spread around a lot this season. After all, it's not an easy task to cover everyone in this offense. The Texans' running game should see some level of improvement from last season as well, with the additions of Joe Mixon and Cam Akers, who by the way was balling out in the preseason. I also got to give a shout out to the boy Burdish Brooks, who made the roster as an undrafted free agent. So if those additions and a healthier offensive line, the Texans are able to establish a run game this season, then I don't really know what stops them this year. And we still have yet to talk about the defensive side of things, which is the strong suit of our head coach, DeMeco Ryans, which should also take a step up from last year, as it was DeMeco's first year being able to implement his style of defense. So our team should be a little bit more comfortable with this system. We also can't forget the new pieces the Texans added to the defense this offseason, headlined by pass rusher Danielle Hunter, who the Texans added via free agency from the Minnesota Vikings. Now, Hunter is coming off a career-high 16.5 sacks season for the Vikings, and this year, he'll be paired up with the reigning Defensive Rookie of the Year, Will Anderson Jr., both of which saw some of the highest double-team rates amongst edges in the league last year. So it's safe to say, things might free up for them a little bit this year. After all, you can't double-team everyone. Speaking of Anderson though, with him heading into his second year in the NFL, and having seemed to really start to figure things out at the end of last season, I think this year is where we will see Anderson take the next step into becoming a top edge rusher in the league. I say that because last year was not only Anderson's first year in the NFL, which obviously is a step up from college, so it can take some time to figure things out, but it was also Anderson's first full year coming out of a 3-point stance compared to in college where he came out of a 2-point stance. Now, if you don't know what that means, basically for defensive ends, when lining up, a 3-point stance is when you have a hand on the ground, and with a 2-point stance, you don't have any hands on the ground and are more upright, both of which have their positives and negatives. Anyways, I say this because coming out of college, this was something people thought he might struggle with starting out in the league. But now with him having a full year under his belt to adapt to it, I think he'll be a lot more comfortable and also smarter overall. Another player the Texans added to their defense this offseason is Azeez Al-Shaair from the Tennessee Titans. Hopefully I said that correctly, who previously had been a part of D'Amico Ryan's defense in San Francisco. Also, by the way, I'm really excited for him this season, not only because he's familiar with the system, but because when I saw him play against the Texans last year, it felt like I heard his name involved in almost every stop against us. So I may have not seen too much of his tape from last year, but from what I saw, I was impressed. The Texans also had a defensive lineman, Denico Autry from the Tennessee Titans as well, who had 11.5 sacks for them last season. However, we won't see Denico Autry for the first 6 games of the season due to his suspension. But when he comes back, he will only make our pass rush even more lethal. We also can't forget to mention the players added from the draft being the safety from USC, Kalen Bullock, who's been talked about highly from those in and around the team, which could be a reason why we didn't go for Justin Simmons in free agency. And also, of course, the corner from Georgia, Kamari Lassiter. Lassiter has been impressing many people during training camp and will likely be starting opposite side of Derek Stingley Jr. And speaking of Stingley, although it was a small sample size, Stingley is coming off a breakout season. And it looks like if he could stay healthy, he will be a top 5 corner in the NFL easily. And if you don't believe me, just watch the tape or look at the analytics. So overall, it looks like we will see a more dominant defense from the Texans this season. Lastly, to wrap things up, there are 3 people who returned from last season who I feel not only played a vital role in this team's success, but also in setting the culture of this team, and honestly, they're being overlooked. The first 2 men I'm talking about are our offensive coordinator, Bobby Slowick, and our quarterbacks coach, Gerard Johnson, both of which had teams interested around the league at becoming a head coach and an offensive coordinator. The reason why I feel their return for another season is so significant is because CJ already feels comfortable in the offense we ran last year. So going into his second year in the league, it'll only help that CJ won't have to learn an entirely new offense and build connections with a new set of coaches. Now, the third person I'm talking about might surprise you, because it's someone who is not only a backup, but is also out for the season, and that is Case Keenum. But Keenum's return being significant has nothing to do with his play on the field. Rather, it's due to his relationship with CJ. You see, CJ and Keenum have both talked about their relationship and how it's more than just football. CJ has even talked about how he sometimes feels more comfortable going to Keenum for his advice and thoughts rather than the coaches. It's clear that CJ has a lot of respect for him and almost views him as a mentor of sort. Not to mention that, like CJ, Keenum also has a strong relationship with God and is very vocal about that. In fact, many leaders of this team have been vocal about their belief in God, and I feel CJ and Keenum have played a big part that has allowed them to feel comfortable expressing their beliefs. Also, hearing CJ give glory and talk about his relationship with God has definitely contributed to my relationship with God as well. And if it's done that for me, I could only imagine what it's done to many others. Now, some of y'all might not be religious, which is fine, but I feel this is a strong part of the Texans' current culture that has not only united and created a family-like bond amongst this team, but is also a significant reason as to why many players want to be a part of this team and why many fans can't help but root for them. So overall, from the coaches to the players, to even the culture of this team, I believe this team has what it takes to not only compete for a Super Bowl, but win it. You can call me biased all you want, and there's definitely some truth in that, but as a Texans fan, I could say I've never felt this excited for a team in my life. And honestly, I couldn't be happier to support this team. But with all that being said, let me know what you thought of the video and how you think the Texans will end up this season. Also, leave some of your hot takes for the season down below. Maybe we can come back to them and see if any of them prove to be right. And if you did enjoy, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more. Trust me, I do really appreciate it. So you may not agree with what I have to say here, and if you do, or don't, all I gotta say is, watch out, because the Houston Texans are about to take over.